All to this session for which I am extremely nervous since morning. I've been telling Amish. And Bharatvarsha, Reimagining India through Ancient Narratives. And for this discussion, there could be nobody else better than Amish, the master craftsman himself, to talk about narratives, the ancient narratives. He needs no introduction. Amish is a writer. Amish has been a cultural ambassador, continues to be a cultural ambassador, even when he's back from London, from the position that he held for the government earlier. He's a documentary storyteller and a star at it right now. The documentary is, I think, trending on #1. So welcome,
Thank you.
Amish, and thank you for making time for this session today. I know you have to rush, so we'll try to keep it as quick as possible. I'll try to, yeah. So our epics are a reservoir of ancient narratives. They've been shaping cultural and spiritual fabric for our country. And if we are in a literary festival right now, and I won't be wrong in saying that Ramayana and Mahabharata are the perpetual bestsellers for thousands of years. Amish, what is it that continues to inspire, engage, and keep the readers, and not just the readers, but even writers, so interested in these epics?
The lines that you just quoted
Are from,
at the beginning
yeah,
are
Vishnu
actually
Puran.
from the Vishnu Puran, which historians tell us is maybe 2,500 years old. But there are many who say it's probably a lot older. We're the only pre-Bronze Age culture that is still alive. Many Indians like to think we are unique. We are not. There are many other cultures like us. It's just that we've survived. That's all. And I think the foundational answer to your question is, why have we survived? It won't be fair to say that we were stronger than pharaonic Egyptians or deeper than Gilgamesh Mesopotamians. That's not true. They were as deep and fine cultures. I think the greatest legacy our ancestors gave to us is that our culture is a wonderful mix of rigidity and flexibility. And when a storm comes, a cyclone comes to Odisha very often, if the tree is too rigid, it'll get blown over. But if you have no rigidity, if you're like Kusha grass, then everyone just walks all over you. Then you have no identity either. So, but if you have the right amount of flexibility when the storms come, so you can bend back, but then equally the right amount of rigidity that you can come back when the storm blows over, then you can keep your culture alive. And that to me is what our stories allows us to do. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata are, of course, they go back thousands and thousands and thousands of years, but they're also flexible. So that when a new age comes, a new era, a new idiom, the stories actually get adapted. And that's what keeps these stories alive. And that's what helps keep our culture alive. What is culture? It's food you eat, the clothes you wear, how your society organizes itself, and the stories you believe in, the stories you follow.
You made a very interesting point about flexibility, and the reason that we've survived is because of this very flexibility. But do you also think that the retelling of these stories and somewhere in between, the fact that they are called mythologies, and mythology arises from the word mithya, and which is untrue. So do you think that these liberties being taken with the characters, because there are so many characters in Mahabharata or Ramayana who I think have their own stories offshooted from, and writers have taken the liberties with it. Do you think those liberties somewhere distort the truth in it? Because there is still, it is a belief that Ram, we know that Ram existed. He was our ancestor.
Of course he existed.
Yeah, and taking those...
Look, the word mythology does not come from the Sanskrit word mithya, actually.
Okay.
It comes from the Greek word mythos.
Yeah.
Mythos doesn't mean untruth. Mythos means a story that hides the philosophical truth. Um, and that's the way to look at mythology. In Sanskrit, we say itihas. Thus it happened. Um, in terms of of different interpretations, I think if we ask many of them out here, is Lakshman Rekha there in the Ramayana? How many would say Lakshman Rekha is there in the Ramayana? Show of hands. Lakshman Rekha is there in the Ramayana. You've seen me ask this before. Yeah? That's because you saw it in a 1980s television serial. That's why many of you think Lakshman Rekha is there in the Ramayana. The way Lord Lakshman took an arrow and drew that line. In the original Valmiki Ramayana, Lakshman Rekha has not been mentioned. There is no, forget about the description, there is no mention of the Lakshman Rekha at all. The first, at least from the versions that I have read, the place where Lakshman Rekha is mentioned first is the Ramcharitmanas by Goswami Tulsidas ji, which was written in the 16th century. And even there, it's not described the way it's shown in the television serial. Now, this is a different interpretation. Uh, and no one would say Goswami Tulsidas ji took liberties. It was a creative and respectful interpretation. Liberties is a very Western term, that I am this brilliant creative guy and I'll take liberties and you have to accept me for who I am. I think that's a very arrogant approach. In the Indian way, we do interpretations of our most loved stories, which are usually always the Ramayana, Mahabharata, and the Puranas. And this tradition has been there for thousands of years. You don't just Ramcharitmanas is one example of this, but you find so many versions of the Ramayana. Kritibashi Ramayana from
Of course, and there's a
Bengal,
Sita's
Kamba
Ramayana.
Ramayanam
Yeah, there's a
from
Sita's Ramayana
the
as well,
Tamil
which is told
version,
from
the Adbhut Ramayana, which is also credited to Valmiki ji, in
Right.
which Sita Ma killed Ravan. She's a warrior. In that, my Sita warrior of Mithila is inspired by that version.
Right.
And not just can be called religious or spiritual texts. Even in our plays, in Sanskrit plays, for example, Kalidasa made many changes from the Skanda Puran
Right.
when he wrote Kumara Sambhavam. It was celebrated in his era as well. Bhasa, who was the greatest Sanskrit playwright ever, Kalidas himself said Bhasa was the greatest Sanskrit playwright ever. He wrote Pancharatra, which is an interpretation of the Mahabharata, where the war didn't happen, right? And it's Bhasa would have been at least 2,000, 2,500 years ago. And Bhasa is considered the greatest playwright ever. For all of us who are Indians, he's the greatest playwright ever, not just the greatest Sanskrit playwright. And it wasn't taking liberties, it was a respectful interpretation, because all of us Indians want to hear the stories of our gods again and again and again in different ways. That's the Indian tradition.
Fascinating, but that also brings up a question of whether writers of this genre are under a constant pressure to remain within the dharmic fold, so to say.
Dharma is flexible, right? And I do interpretations, but at the core there should be respect. So you find books which generate controversies, movies which generate controversies, and sadly, often controversies are created with the help of their friends in the media. We all know what happens, sadly. I know there's some media people here. Don't take this the wrong way, but we all know what happens. It's a
True.
it's a very cheap marketing strategy. If you yourself avoid controversy as an artist, it usually doesn't happen. In my case, there's been no controversies. But I think also if you write with respect, Indians don't mind a different interpretation as long as you write with respect. And I can give you examples even in books. You can say, even if it's a few million copies, even if it's 7-8 million copies, it's not as mass as movies. Fair enough. But in movies, I can give you examples which, if you write a script, it would appear like yaar controversy ho jayega. Like if you went to a Bollywood producer in Mumbai and said shoot a scene where the main hero breaks the base of a shivling and then carries it to a waterfall and then places it under the waterfall. You'll say, yaar, bahut controversy hoga. But in Bahubali, it's one of our most iconic scenes ever. because it was shot with respect. Raja ji is, from all that I know, he genuinely is a believing Hindu. He actually worships the gods. He shows in his movies. So it reflected in the scene. There was no controversy. Indians don't mind a different interpretation as long as you do it with respect. That's been my learning. Yeah, applaud for India. Yeah.
So, since we started talking about the dharmic interpretations, my next question is about your books, Dharma and Idols. What is the general understanding of dharma and idol worshipping, and what is it that you've actually broken, the kind of myths that you've broken in both these books about these two aspects?
Firstly, on dharma, the root of the dharma is erroneously translated as religion often, which is not true. The correct word for Sanskrit word for religion is panth. It's a path. Dharma is above religion. It's above everything. It's above, in our way, it's above the gods also. Right. The root of the word dharma is a dhatu called dhru. Dhru means that which binds, that which sustains, that which lasts. And adharma is that which unbalances, that which does not sustain, that which is temporary. Right? So anything that creates balance in society, that binds the universe, that lasts, that is permanent, that is dharma. Right? Uh, and then all our stories are essentially explorations of dharma. And dharma is very complex. There are no simple 10 rules to follow. Right? A soldier at the border has a different dharma as compared to me as a lay citizen. Right? And he has a different swadharma, I have a different swadharma. There's a different kul dharma, there's a different yuga dharma. It's a complex philosophy. Exactly, which all of us are supposed to explore and then make the choices that we think are right, and then live with the consequences, right? And at the end of the Mahabharata, if you remember, Lord Krishna is cursed by Ma Gandhari, who's a human being, right? Lord Krishna is God himself. Ma Gandhari curses him because she said, "You could have stopped this war if you wanted to." Uh, Lord Krishna doesn't say, "How dare you this blasphemy," right? He just folds his hands together and says, "As you command, Ma." Uh, what does that tell us? That dharma is above even the divine. No one is free of the law of cause and effect. That's, and our entire way of life, the dharmic religions, is about exploring different parts of dharma. Idol worshipping, through this book, actually, I want to explain why I'm such a proud idol worshipper. There's been a tide of history against idol worshipping for the last 2000 years.
Yes.
Most of the ancient world was actually idol worshipping. Uh, uh, Most of them were killed. They didn't just die out; they were killed. Most of them. India is among the last surviving idol worshippers, and Indians exhibit idol worshippers. Indians, I think, exhibit a form of the battered wife syndrome. I don't know if you've heard of this psychological this theory that because sadly there are women who get beaten by their husbands, utterly wrong, needs to be stopped. The parents, the husbands need to be punished, but it does happen. And what happens often, sadly, is many women, many wives blame themselves for their husbands beating them. It's called the battered wife syndrome, that they must have done something wrong. And that's why the husband lost his temper and beat them. And if you try and talk to them and explain to them, it's not your fault, it's your husband's fault, they'll actually get angry with you. This is called the battered, not every woman shows this, but among some, it's called the battered wife syndrome. Idol worshipping Indians were showing a version of this. That if for 2000 years everyone has been saying idol worshipping is wrong and that you need to be converted or killed if you're an idol worshipper and our temples need to be broken, then maybe they were right. In a country like India, we'll have songs like Patthar ki puja karke main hari. Someone writes such a song and millions of Indians make such a song a hit. Or in a hit movie, they'll just put a stone और उस पे पान का थूक लगा देंगे, and then it's subtly said, देखो इन गधे को, they start worshipping a stone also. Don't they know there's not God? when actually, if you realize, if you go deeper into the core philosophies of idol worshipping, most idol worshipping cultures are intuitively liberal, and
True.
it's not an accident. It emerges from the philosophies at the heart of idol worshipping. And that's what my sister and I, we wrote this book, Bhavna Di and I, and we want to explain the concept of idol worshipping without any judgment of those cultures that reject idols.
Hmm.
But you don't want to worship idols, go ahead, don't worship. But you have no right to kill me just because I'm
Correct.
worshipping an idol, right?
Do you also think it's got to do with the kind of city bred lives and education? Because I mean, while I've been born and brought up in Delhi, but I hail from Uttarakhand. And every morning, every person who steps out of the home has a tika on his forehead, his or her forehead. Similarly, if you go down south, they are not, but somewhere in the northern region, we feel uncomfortable or ashamed of applying a tilak
It's a
and
result
moving out. Yeah,
of the colonial education system, and we've
right.
still not been decolonized. Uh, I am not some anti-Western extremist. There are good things about the West which we should learn,
And we've
right?
always been imbibing good things from the
Yeah.
world. Yeah.
There's
But
a lovely line out there in that Shivali India Foundation, Ano Bhadraha Kritvo Yantu Vishwatah. That's a Sanskrit line. It means, let noble thoughts come to me from all directions. This was probably written, I don't know, 2000, 2,500 years ago. This is what our ancestors thought.
thought. Yeah.
All directions of the world, Vishwatah, right? So we are happy to learn from anyone in the world. Goddess Saraswati can bless anyone.
Anyone.
But we must not forget our own roots. And sadly, our education system is such that we forget our own roots. Our entire education system, the aim is पढ़ा लिखा के बच्चे को अंग्रेज बना दो. So we forget much of what our roots are and much of what makes us a special culture.
Do you think, since we have come to this point, should I then probably start asking you questions that are slightly political because you have been in a role where you have been a cultural ambassador
Seen
and
Mohinder Ramannath bat in cricket? When the ball would come on the off stump, he would just leave the ball.
yeah. No, but you're not allowed to leave answering the question because I really want to know this. That, while we are talking about this aspect of, not being in connect or losing connect with our roots and being shy of our identities, do you think in the last 10 years, and why I specifically mentioned 10 years is because of the current regime, do you think it has started to change? That thing has started to change with the people, with not just within India, but the opinions and perspective of people looking towards India.
Has the change picked up over the last 10 years? Yes, but I would say the root of the change is actually 1991.
Okay.
Because that's when, after centuries of decline, our economic rise began. Many think that the British Raj was the worst period for us economically. Uh, uh, Actually, not true. Our economic decline continued relative to the rest of the world post 1947. There were many good things that were done post 1947. We chose to be a democracy. All those were good. We have a strong state. But economically, we chose socialism, which was a mistake. Socialism has an unparalleled record of destroying economies wherever it has been tried. Our economic decline continued post 1947. Our lowest point in human history economically relative to the rest of the world was actually the late 1980s. It's only post 1991 that our rise began. So there was a wave that began post 1991. Why? Because as the economic tide lifted, many of us Indians who were rooted in the real India suddenly had a voice because suddenly we had money, right? Uh, it was look, pre 1991. Those of us who were rooted, it didn't matter because we couldn't talk because we were more worried about food on the table.
Food on the table,
right?
True.
You can't, Maslow's hierarchy, right? You can't worry about the softer stuff unless you can't have an expansive heart if your stomach is empty,
True.
right? So actually, it's a trend that started post 1991. It started becoming that the change is happening, started becoming obvious, I think, in some private sector industries, at the state level by the 90s and 2000s. It's easy to, I was in banking. It's easy to forget how anglicized banking was.
True.
Pre ICICI, IDBI, UTI, and SDFC Bank, right? And then it slowly became more Indianized. Now finally you're seeing that change at the national political level as well.
And do you think that the such a change or a political will, especially if you view their efforts of reviving the indigenous culture in the tribal areas, and even after conversions, is
That's the point I'm trying to make. It's not a sudden shift. It was a wave that started
already
post
happening?
1991, and you're seeing the impact of it now. Now, a wave starts, and a leader can guide it, or a leader uh, could have that
Just
wave dissipate away. There's a wave that's there in Odisha. Odisha has developed. So I lived in Odisha in the 80s and 70s and 80s. I love Odisha as a state. I lived there. I lived here for some 8 9 years. But I remember how sadly how poor it was in that era. And we used to live in Western Odisha, just off Rourkela, and just a little further west was the Naxal infested area. My parents and many of them used to do. We weren't that well off either in those days, but they used to do shramdan, charity work through basically contributing your labor, right? And but look at the change that's happened in the last 20 years now. There was a tide, but it was well led by the leadership here. So the leadership, of course, makes a difference. But for a country to rise, you need both. You need a bottom-up wave of energy coming up, and you need a leadership which guides it well.
And since you've been abroad for a while, you've been in London representing India. How has the international view of India changed and especially in terms of our culture, in terms of our identity?
They notice us a lot more now. And I know many of us think that the Western media has a bias against us, and Western academia has a bias against us. Some cases it may be true. Some cases, frankly, it's just ignorance. You'll be shocked how ignorant many Western journalists are. Many of them actually thought the invasion of Libya was a good idea, right? And you have to be stunned at how ignorant many of them are of non-Western cultures. Many of them weren't even aware that there's a Shia and Sunni group among Muslims. They are that ignorant. Um, I think the key thing about India wasn't whether there was a bias, it was actually how ignored we were. That's one of the things I saw at the beginning. Um, there's a country brand survey that was done by I'm forgetting the name of that company, Brand Group or something. It's a London-based company. Among the best research works of the brand power of different countries. And I had gone for the launch of that report in 2019 in London. In that entire conference, I was the only Indian, not just on stage, even in the audience, right? And India's ranking was 29 or 30. And I was shocked that it's so low. They said, no, actually, it's risen a lot. It was even lower. So, what has happened now is actually the West, many of the rest of the world is actually beginning to notice us over the last few years. One is, of course, our economic heft. We've become so much wealthier. Second, there are many good things that the government has done. I think the Yoga Day was a brilliant, inspired move, right? Because once a year on first, everyone, gets media everywhere. They do yoga and they are reminded that yoga is an Indian
form of keeping healthy.
of keeping healthy. The fact that we did much in COVID that Western countries did not do, right? Western countries always talk a good game, but they allowed their excess COVID vaccines to expire rather than help Africa because they were keeping backups they were that selfish. But they pretend to be human rights saviors for the entire world. Where did Africa and the Caribbean islands and
India was the one
we're the ones who gave them vaccines. And every African diplomat I met, and even in public conferences in London, would speak of it and would talk to Western diplomats out there that basically we get help from people like India All we get from you guys is a lecture, right? Uh, so there are things that are changing more because of the reality of India is changing. But the first step is we need to get noticed a lot more. We are getting noticed a lot more, but considering we have the highest population and the fifth largest economy, we don't get that level of notice. That will change. The next 10 years is going to be exciting for uh, all of us in the culture space. We're going to be the third largest economy soon in a few years.
Absolutely, yes,
Uh,
yes.
and soft power rises sustainably only after you have actual hard power.
Right.
Uh, Soft power without hard power doesn't last.
Coming back to storytelling, and especially, from the perspective that we are sitting in the state of Bhagwan Jagannath, and on the 22nd of January, the entire country celebrated the Ayodhya temple inauguration and the Pran Pratishtha. Uh, how do you view? I'll come to Ramayana, Ayodhya in a little while. But my first question in this particular area is that how do you see this folklore, uh, you know, bringing the country together? How do you see that we have Bhagwan Jagannath here, who's also, he is Lord Krishna and Vishnu.
I worship him.
Yeah.
I'm going to be going there
Yeah.
this evening.
Yeah.
Jai
And
Jagannath.
Jai Jagannath. And, you have Lord Ram, you have Bhagwan, and you have Shiva, you have so many forms of Ishwara for us to worship. How does still it continue to unite all of us as Bharat, as a country?
Because we're a dharmic culture and we have respect for multiple truths. But the best way to understand this is an American scholar called Diana Eck, who'd written the book India: Sacred Geography. And that she'd written a line which I think was so insightful about India. She said, India was not built on the power of its kings, it was built on the footsteps of its pilgrims. And that makes our culture very different. Uh, Indians from across the subcontinent would gather at Ayodhya or Kashi or Jagannath Ji or Chidambaram Ji in Tamil Nadu or Trambakeshwar in Maharashtra, Somnath Ji in Gujarat.
Manifestations, yeah.
And this would create, and of course it's a religious event, it's, I don't deny that, but it also creates a national consciousness.
Right.
Because all of us gather at one temple to worship the god or goddess who inspires us, and that builds a national consciousness. um, and Pashupati Nath ji, there was someone from Nepal out here who just met me. Pashupati Nath ji, it's been tradition for centuries. The priests actually come from Kerala for that. Rameshwaram, which is in Tamil Nadu, the priests actually come from far up north. This tradition has been around in the subcontinent for long. Um, it broke down with the invasions as many of our great temples, particularly in the north, were destroyed. To find our really ancient temples, you have to go in the deep south,
Right.
Tamil Nadu, Kerala, where the invaders didn't reach. But as these temples get revived, the national consciousness that they build through pilgrims will also get revived. You must have seen the videos in Ayodhya or Kashi of people from, someone from Tamil Nadu performing something there, Maharashtrians doing Dol Tasha out there, Northeasterners, people from Kashmir.
Right.
All of them gather out there and builds a national consciousness.
So, coming to the final question and the final part of this conversation is your latest stint as a documentary producer, and how did we would like to know how did that happen? I've watched your first one, which was on Ram, and you traced the entire path from Ayodhya to Lanka on that journey. And now this one is more about the origin of, the history
Ram
of
Janmabhoomi
Ayodhya.
temple.
Yeah, history of Ayodhya. How was that journey as an explorer? And
It's fantastic, yeah. So it happened through an accident actually. I was approached to host this series for Discovery TV, and I thought it's a great idea. Why not? I mean, I get to visit all these places where I would like to pray in, and someone will actually pay me for it. Why not? And so I did that, and it was the
But
document.
how did it work for you as a believer and a spiritual? I mean,
It
did
was
you
beautiful
actually?
because as a believer, of course, as a worshiper, you go out there and feel the energy. Uh, but as a quote unquote modern person, science oriented person, you want to see evidence of stuff that you've read, right? So, all of us who've read the Valmiki Ramayana, I'm sure you remember a scene where Valmiki ji said that in Chitrakoot there was an underground river, right? And at least I remember at that time, yeah, underground river, I'm
Not
not
very
so sure.
believable.
I'm not
Yeah.
so
Ha,
sure.
ha, ha.
Well, we went to Chitrakoot. We had a geologist with us, by the way. It was a discovery thing.
That's
So they
called the
wanted to make.
Gupta Ganga, I
Yeah.
think. Huh? Hmm.
There's a massive cavern out there where there is an underground stream which
Hmm.
flows out there.
Hmm.
Okay. And we recorded out there and it's there in the documentary. Right.
Right.
So many of these things that we would have read in a
Which
ancient
reinforces
text,
your belief.
and then you see it like,
Hmm.
my God, it's actually true.
It's
Right.
actually true. Yeah.
So that was really beautiful. The crew was actually Indians of all communities. Yeah, we had Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs in it, and then a few days into our shooting, I think it started striking many of us that we are walking the same path that Lord Ram
Lord
had
Ram.
walked on.
Yeah.
Okay, thousands of years ago, and it actually started impacting us. And we used to, all of us used to just, it just happened, organically. We used to end each day shoot with Jai Shri Ram, right? Jai Shri Ram, Jai Shri Ram. And it obviously starts impacting you at a
Right.
level. And it doesn't matter what religion you practice, what community you're from, what language you speak. If you have the soil of Mother India in your genes, then you're one of us. And this heritage is a part of our collective heritage.
That's a very good note and a lovely note to close this conversation. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Amish. It's always absolutely thrilling to listen to you, and I think it's been an invigorating one for me at least. Thank you for being patient with us. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
This really was an intriguing session. Etymological, historical, sociological, cultural insights offered by Amish Tripathi ji and very pertinent questions by Lipika ji. So, Lipika ji, you would be felicitated. I request Dr. Soumya and Lipika ji to please be up on the stage. So, Dr. Soumya would be felicitating Lipika ji. Yeah. You could join in for the picture. Yeah. So, you could be here. This clearly was an excellent talk. So now we will have a book release. The book is called Tiger Season and it is by Gargi Rawat, who is a prominent Indian journalist, news anchor, environment reporter, and she works for the NDTV. So I welcome her